The incessant pounding on the door startled Part from his sleep. He stumbled out of bed, his mind foggy with the remnants of a dream he couldn't quite grasp. As he fumbled with the lock, a wave of unease washed over him. It was 3 a.m. Who could be at his door at this hour? His mother stood on the other side, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't need to say anything for Part to know something was terribly wrong. The unspoken plea in her eyes sent a shiver down his spine. He ushered her inside, his heart pounding with a dread he couldn't explain. His mother, usually a pillar of strength, seemed small and fragile in the dim light of the hallway. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly. Part offered her a glass of water, his mind racing with questions he was afraid to ask. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken fear and a shared sense of foreboding. Part's parents had always had a complicated relationship. Immigrants from India, they had arrived in America with nothing but dreams and an unwavering determination to build a better life for their children. They had worked tirelessly, their love for their children the driving force behind their every sacrifice. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life lay a current of mistrust. Part's father, Arun, had always been a charismatic and ambitious man, his drive for success sometimes bordering on ruthlessness. Part's mother, Plea, was the anchor of the family, her quiet strength and unwavering love holding them together. Years ago, Plea had discovered an affair Arun had been having with a colleague. The betrayal had shattered her, but for the sake of their family, she had chosen to forgive him. The scar of that betrayal, however, had never truly healed, casting a long shadow over their marriage. His mother's late-night visit brought all those suppressed memories flooding back to Part. His father had been distant lately, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a brooding silence. He would disappear for hours on end, his phone glued to his ear, his voice hushed whenever Part entered the room. A seed of suspicion took root in Part's mind, growing with each passing day. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that his father was hiding something sinister. Torn between loyalty and a growing sense of dread, Part made a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. He installed spyware on his father's computer, justifying his actions as a necessary evil to protect his family. He delved into his father's online activity, his heart sinking with each passing discovery. Large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts, encrypted emails with unknown recipients, and most disturbing of all, multiple life insurance policies taken out in his mother's name, each with exorbitant payouts. Part felt a cold dread grip his heart. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough to confirm his worst fears. His father, the man who had always preached the importance of family and hard work, was leading a double life, a web of deceit spun around the very people he claimed to love. He confronted his mother with his findings, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Her reaction was not what he had expected. Instead of shock or disbelief, a look of weary resignation washed over her face. She already knew. She had suspected Arun's infidelity for years, the late-night phone calls and unexplained absences confirming her worst fears. But she had chosen to turn a blind eye, clinging to the hope that he would eventually come to his senses, that their love for their family would be enough to bring him back. Part's discovery, however, shattered that fragile hope. His father wasn't just having an affair. He was planning something sinister, something that could destroy their family. Section 5. A cry for help ignored. Desperate, Part and his mother decided to go to the authorities. They met with a detective, a world-weary man with tired eyes, and poured out their hearts. They presented the evidence they had gathered, their voices trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. The detective listened patiently, his expression impassive. When they were finished, he leaned back in his chair, a sigh escaping his lips. He told them that while their concerns were valid, they didn't have enough concrete evidence to warrant a full-blown investigation. He assured them that he would look into the matter, but his tone was laced with a skepticism that chilled them to the bone. Part and his mother left the police station feeling defeated and vulnerable, their pleas for help falling on deaf ears. They were on their own. Section 6. Shifting perspectives. Desperate for answers, Part sought solace in therapy. He poured out his heart to his therapist, Dr. Evans, a kind woman with a calming presence. He told her everything: his father's strange behavior, the spyware, the life insurance policies, the cold indifference of the authorities. Dr. Evans listened patiently, her gaze warm and non-judgmental. As Part spoke, she noticed a recurring theme in his narrative: fear. Fear for his mother's safety, fear of his father's wrath, but most of all, fear of the unknown. She gently suggested a different perspective. What if Aaron's behavior wasn't driven by malice but by fear itself? What if he was trapped, caught in a web of his own making, desperate to protect his family from a threat they didn't know existed? Part scoffed at the idea at first, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Could he have misjudged his father? Could there be another explanation for his actions? Section 7. A Glimmer of Hope. Part left Dr. Evans's office that day with a sliver of hope and a heart full of conflicting emotions. He decided to confront his father, not with accusations, but with a plea for understanding. He wanted to believe that Dr. Evans was right, that there was more to the story than met the eye. He found his father in his study, hunched over a pile of paperwork, his face etched with worry. Hart took a deep breath and spoke, his voice trembling slightly. He told his father that he knew about the money, the emails, the life insurance policies. He asked him to explain, to tell him the truth. To Hart's surprise, his father didn't deny it. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and relief. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Just as he was about to reveal the truth, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile moment of understanding. Section 8. The Confrontation. Part's blood ran cold. He recognized the sound of his father's voice, hushed and urgent, as he answered the door. Two men, their faces obscured by the shadows of the hallway, stepped inside. They were tall and imposing, their movements radiating an air of quiet menace. Part's father tried to close the door, but one of the men wedged his foot in the doorway, his voice a low growl. Part's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. His father was in trouble, and whatever he had gotten himself entangled in had just come to collect. He exchanged a look with his father, a silent conversation passing between them. Fear warred with a fierce determination to protect his family. He grabbed a heavy bookend from the shelf, his hand trembling slightly, and stepped forward, ready to confront the unknown. Section 9. A Tragic Misunderstanding. The confrontation escalated quickly. One of the men lunged at Part's father, a struggle ensuing. Part, fueled by adrenaline and fear, swung the bookend blindly, connecting with a sickening thud. The room fell silent. The two men froze, their eyes widening in shock. Part watched in horror as one of the men stumbled backward, clutching his head, blood oozing between his fingers. His father lay sprawled on the floor, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. It was only then, in the eerie silence that followed, that Part realized the magnitude of what he had done. He had misread the situation, misjudged his father's intentions. The men at the door weren't there to harm them, they were there to warn them, to protect them from a danger they couldn't even fathom. And in a moment of blind fear, Part had destroyed any chance of understanding, of unraveling the truth. Section 10. Picking up the pieces. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, sirens wailing in the distance, and the cold, sterile walls of a hospital room. One of the men, seriously injured, lay unconscious in the ICU. The other, his face a mask of grief and anger, sat in a corner, guarded by a stoic police officer. Part's father, his face pale and bruised, sat silently in a chair beside his bed, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. He had tried to explain, to tell Part about the threats, the debts he had accrued trying to protect their family from a dangerous business associate. But his words were lost in the whirlwind of accusations, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Part sat in a chair by the window, his head in his hands, the weight of his actions crushing him. He had let fear and suspicion cloud his judgment, leading him to a tragic misunderstanding that had irrevocably shattered his family. Section 11. Fear's Grim Harvest. In the end, the truth came out, but it was a hollow victory. The business associate, facing charges of his own, revealed the extent of his threats against Part's family, confirming everything his father had tried to tell him. The life insurance policies were a desperate attempt to provide for his family if the worst were to happen. The offshore accounts, a misguided attempt to protect their savings. Part was cleared of any wrongdoing, the authorities recognizing his actions as self-defense. But the legal exoneration did little to ease the burden of guilt and regret that weighed heavily on his soul. He had misjudged his father, allowing fear and mistrust to poison his heart, ultimately leading to a tragic and irreversible outcome. Part's story is a cautionary tale about the destructive power of fear and the importance of trust and communication within a family. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger lies not in the shadows that surround us, but in the darkness that resides within our own hearts.